Consider supporting this podcast on Patreon. On this episode of the What is Asia podcast, I interview Reza Yeganehshakib, a lecturer at the California State University Dominguez Hills, to talk about China's One Belt, One Road initiative as it's playing out in Central and West Asian countries. Professor Yeganehshakib, thanks for coming on this episode of the What is Asia podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So, in this particular topic, we're going to be talking about something that I think people have heard of a lot more frequently lately, something called One Belt, One Road. Can you talk a little bit, first of all, what is this project? And you talk about it specifically within the context of a lot of Central Asian states like Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Turkey, Uzbekistan. What is this project and what does it mean to those places?
Yes. Well, first of all, when we talk about the Belt and Road Initiative, it's basically the revival of the ancient Silk Roads. We did not have one single Silk Road that, for example, exported Chinese silk through, let's say, Central Asia, Persia, and then Anatolia and Europe, and then in return they get something from this country and bring it back and import it into China. Rather, we have had always a huge network, sea routes as well as land roads. So altogether, these Silk Roads revival, this huge, massive network has a new name. So it comes actually out in late 2013, this whole idea of the revival of the Silk Road by the current president of China, President Xi Jinping. And he actually talked about this huge network that includes a land-based Silk Road Economic Belt, or SREB, as well as a Maritime Silk Road, or MSR. These together is known as the Belt and Road Initiative, OBOR, or just simply Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. So China is not only country, of course, in this huge network. It's neither this project is just a combination of heavy infrastructure endeavors and basically finances and loans and anything like that. Rather, it's more aspiring, more long-lasting project with more long-lasting, long-term actually effects on all of those countries involved in this project. This doesn't mean that we know about the future of this project, or, for example, will this bring prosperity for everybody within this project. So it is actually expected that this project will bring about more political, economic, and institutional powers for Beijing. However, it seems that the West has not really understood the depths of these transformations that we are going to face in the future. Neither is the West ready to deal with it. So it's completely basically materialized. When it is completely materialized, this Project Belt and Road Initiative eventually will affect the lives of almost 65% of the people on planet Earth. It is also expected that the changes, basically, the weight of the global economy will be shifted from the West Atlantic basically basin, which is like Europe, North America, towards China. This will let, of course, China to be at the top of the world economy, and the geopolitical order and the values also may shift from the current ones, the common and dominant ones, which is controlled by the West. This order also may emphasize mutual benefit and shared responsibilities rather than individual self-rule, which this latter, basically the mutual benefit, mutual responsibility, and basically getting away from that self-rule mentality is something which China is promoting actually within this project. We should remember also within this framework that the Belt and Road Initiative and China becoming basically the engine of the world economy is nothing new. China has been for over 400 years the engine of the world economy. You should not forget the Ming Dynasty that ruled from the half of the 14th century all the way to the mid of the 17th century, and after that the Qing Dynasty, which ruled from the 17th century all the way to the 20th century, and especially at the era of the late Ming and early Qing. For these basically 400 years, China had been already the engine of the world economy. So it's basically the revival of all these projects. And when you talk about all of these countries in Central Asia, these are basically the hearts of the project. Basically in north, when you look at it, it's Central Asia. When we get to the south, it's Pakistan. So Pakistan all the way to the north is basically heart of the project. And then these basically countries are connected, but it is not just about China. We should not forget that a lot of these countries in Central Asia, they're exporters of a lot of, nowadays, of course, raw materials. And also they're looking to transform their economies more towards industrial production. And then we should have a form of import-export from these countries to China, to Europe, and from Europe into these countries. So it's basically something that all of these countries in Central Asia and also in Caucasus will benefit. But of course, this is a huge network. It's not just about these countries. If we go toward the south, then we see that next to Pakistan, we have Afghanistan, we have Iran. And then as we are talking, actually, there is a railway connecting Islamabad to Tehran and to Istanbul. And of course, Turkey is connected with the Baku-Tbilisi-Kars railroad to basically South Caucasus. And over there, we have seen already a big transformation in Azerbaijan basically economy. And also in Georgia, Georgia has been transformed dramatically as a result of expanding its exports to both Azerbaijan and Turkey. And all of it, it's basically attributed to this part of this link, which we call Baku-Tbilisi-Kars, the part of course, this huge project.
Talking a little bit more about what these connecting rail lines mean to the Central Asian countries, can you talk a little bit about some of the important positive and negative effects of sort of connecting these borders together for these countries?
Yes. Well, basically, this network connects South Caucasus with Turkey. This will also provide an access to the railway network of the European Union and then to the few Mediterranean countries. Basically, this path will provide a platform of transportation of goods from Central Asia, mainly, of course, petroleum, oil products, petrochemicals, particularly to the Mediterranean Sea basin in Turkey, and then, of course, to the global market. So everything along this line of transportation will be affected. For instance, Kazakhstan, which has become the number one spot in a recent ranking of how attractive Central Asian countries are for business investors, for direct, basically foreign direct investments, thanks to over actually $24 billion that have been invested from European countries into Kazakhstan, is one of the winners of this game because it's expanding its exports to all of these basically energy-hungry countries. Another country that may be affected is Tajikistan. Now, of course, the economy of the country is very fragile, but this year the president of Tajikistan announced that the country is planning to reach to an industrial basically level rather than being exporter of raw materials. So this is another country that is really eyeing on this network to be able to first transform its raw materials, such as, for example, the products from its rich mines, limestone, live animals, cattle, coal, wool, and all of these things into finished goods, and then using this railroad or any other link within this network into the Western countries, the European countries. So finally, basically ensure that there is a very basically more permanent, more sustainable communication system between all of these countries. For example, the energy, China Central Asian gas pipeline already transported over 30 39 actually billion cubic meters in 2020. That's, of course, for China, it's a big deal because China is looking to use this also network to diversify its sources of energy. So there is also other positive impacts which is about the financial integration. That's another part of this basically network, that there are more and more investments from one country to another country, and more also people to people initiative and political basically coordination between all of these countries. So all of these are other the beneficial sides of the story. Of course, there are negative impacts. Perhaps there are some concerns about the loans that China is paying to these countries, that some of these countries may not be able to pay China back. And also there might be some rivalry between these countries, because not just we are talking about political integration and all of these things, but there are rivalries between these countries. For example, imagine one country has products which are more expensive, and the quality of these finished goods are not as good as, for example, the Russian. So Russia will end up using this huge network to efficiently export all of these basically cheaper material, better made materials, finished goods into the other countries. And as a result, the countries which are receiving these materials are going to experience a damage into their domestic production. That's one of the things. And of course, the loans, the debts, and all of these things. Maybe there are some, concerns about corruption because of these loans, because the officials are getting paid into that. But of course, as I mentioned, there are huge amount of benefits as well.
Have there been any problems that have arisen from bringing this One Belt, One Road project to life? Because, of course, when we think about the project, we typically think about China, and they might have a little more capital, for example, than other countries. So are there problems with funding in some of these countries? Are there political issues, for example, corruption, that are causing some of these countries to have difficulty doing their part to bring their railroads in connection with this larger network? Are there logistical challenges? What do some of those look like?
Of course, it's a great question, because now we get into the reality. And a lot of these countries that try to really connect to each other, some of them did not receive funding from China. One of these countries was Azerbaijan, because of political, economic, actually, involvements and the rivalry between, of course, Azerbaijan and Armenia. Armenian lobby, for example, affecting the decisions makers in the United States. Didn't fund this project. Then the Chinese Development Bank did not basically accept this project, because they said that Armenia is better way for this railroad. You don't need to go from Baku to Tbilisi and then try to bypass Armenia. And then here comes the sovereign oil fund of Azerbaijan. They paid almost over $750 million loan to Georgia to fund this project. There are other basically political risks involved in these rivalries. For example, countries in Central Asia may correctly feel that they are surrounded by China and Russia. Some of these countries may not feel that they are over-influenced by China, and of course Russia, which has traditionally been the most powerful economic and politically most powerful player in the entire Central Asia. So these countries in Central Asia that feel that they have been under the pressure from these two big, Beijing and Moscow, they may look for an escape. One escape, which is, I think, is very efficient, and the West should really think about it, is Iran and Iranian territory, and that way that these countries may use to balance this pressure and basically create a sort of balance of power between China, Russia in one hand, and the West, by using Iranian territory, especially using north-south, very efficient, actually, Iranian railroad connecting north to the Caspian Sea shores, to the south to the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman, particularly the port of Chabahar. India is already there. Indians have heavily invested in Chabahar port. They're expanding the port, and that is the port which is not under the US sanctions. So that's one way to balance that influence. Another negative impact or difficulty would be the sanctions, especially US unilateral sanctions towards China, Russia, Iran, and all of that. This will actually push a lot of countries under the sanctions towards China and Russia, which is going to, of course, adversely impact this project and the whole idea of China expanding to these countries. These countries may not cooperate. So, but if they're under the sanctions from the US, this whole equation will shifted and these countries will be pushed towards China and Russia. One example, even on the other side of the planet, which is another actually part of this road, maritime road, is Cuba. Cuba and China just on the Christmas Day signed an agreement. And this agreement is actually about several different fields of cooperation, from infrastructure to technology, culture, education, tourism, energy, communications, biotechnology, which Cubans are really good at it. So this has also another message for the West, that especially the era of United States economic power is feasibly broken more than it's commonly understood. So the one way to basically counter that is, of course, more positive participation of the United States rather than imposing sanctions on different countries. Another example of these rivalries, which is one of these creating logistic, especially difficulties and funding difficulties, is the regional rivalries in West Asia mainly. One example I can give you is, for example, the link which China looked to create between especially Tehran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and the Mediterranean Sea. Russia, when they came to Syria after the whole basically war, because they are not really happy about China expanding towards the West, is not really cooperating with regional powers, and rather they're cooperating with the rivals, which is Israel in this region. This will create a huge security issue, and that will create an impediment towards the logistic expansion of this transportation line, which comes from east to west.
I think one question that has been in some people's minds when they think about this initiative is that certainly it has done a lot to benefit the lives of millions of people, both in China as well as the Central and West Asian countries that we've talked about here. But I think in conjunction with that, people have worried that this has sort of strengthened a trend in authoritarianism. Many of these countries subscribing to that political system, and that this is just going to sort of give more power to that political system. What is your thought on that? Is the fear exaggerated? Do you think that there's opportunity for democratization in these countries that are involved in One Belt, One Road, or is your view more pessimistic?
Yes. Well, we should take a quick look at the Cold War era, that, for example, United States had to choose between socialist, democratically elected governments, which are not US friendly, and the US-backed military dictators. So that was the past. The future will not be like that. Rather, basically, this fund, which all of these countries are receiving in Central Asia, especially, and West Asia, we should not forget that traditionally these countries are not as democracies as, for example, Switzerland. And in the future, I don't see any infrastructure for creation of such Western-made democracies. They have their own way of life, and basically nobody can really judge them for that. But on the other hand, this is the decision of these leaders, that how they want to really spend this money. Some leaders, if they choose to, for example, if they receive a loan from China and they choose to basically spend this loan in a corrupted way, for example, they fund their own endeavors and the money will not be spent on the development of this project, creating infrastructure that positively affect the lives of the people inside those countries. Of course, that's a hazard for those countries. So rather than this project in its essence and its nature be a threat to any of these countries in terms of creation of democracy or going against democracy, it is rather the decision of these leaders how to spend the money, how to really use their power, And of course, that's mainly the dynamics, the domestic dynamics, social, political dynamics within these countries. So I would really try to stay away from that like Cold War mentality and think about, for example, how the US could, for example, kick in, how Japan and India, these traditional players in the world, which has a lot of economic power, can really positively cooperate with this project and be a part of this project. For example, instead of imposing sanctions and trying to make this project as costly as possible and as longer as possible, try to really be a part of it and creating basically I would rather say, a arena of cooperation. For example, give you an example is that there is this uncertainty that, okay, China is expanding, but of course, China is expanding, but it's expanding towards West and South. And if China feels safe from West and South, especially the inflow of energy is safe, and China feels that the inflow of energy is guaranteed, therefore the US-China cooperation will maintain safely and stable, especially the exportation of goods from China to the United States. And there are worries that, for example, this project will expand the China's strengths and what they call the strategic space, creation of a strategic space for China, and this will weaken the US influence in the region. That's, to me, the basically decision of the United States be trying to go against it or be a part of it.
Before we wrap up, one question that I like to ask all my guests is if someone's listening to this podcast and they're interested in knowing more about the One Belt, One Road project, whether it be in China or Central Asia, West Asia, whichever part of the world this project touches, what would be one or two books that you would recommend someone read?
Well, unfortunately, because this project is very political and politicized, lots of books that I've read about this project are really biased. Either they're completely pro it or completely against it. Of course, they try to play a little bit around this idea that they are unbiased, but of course, they have financial benefits. One book that I can recommend, because it's more about finances and money language rather than this political basic implication, is the book written by Xiao Gang. Its name is Financing China's Belt and Road Initiative, Investments and Infrastructure, because it's more about numbers, so there is less politics involved. But if you're looking for lots of reports, they are more actually balanced, because these reports are more with numbers rather than political ideologies. There are some of these financial works, of course, produced in the West, particularly in Washington, D.C. That there are some reports in the National Defense University in Washington, D.C., several of these think tanks, Chatham House in London and all that, they have great works. And there are two Chinese institutions that they are actually, of course, they're promoting their own basically agenda. They have their own perspective, but they have really good reports, especially when it comes to the finances of the project. One is China Center for International Economic Exchange, and the other one is China Institute of Contemporary International Relations. These two are also highly recommended.
Great. Professor, thanks for coming on this episode of the What is Asia podcast.
It has been a pleasure. Thank you.
For those who want to see more content, you can go to the What is Asia podcast YouTube channel or nakotadefonso.com. We'll see you in the next episode.